excited today, guys. This is our first ever podcast, and our guest today is Matt Slaughter from Earth Fort. I got to say, Matt, that having you here today on the 20th anniversary of Earth Fort is super exciting. We got to meet you guys back in 2016, and our partnership with you guys has been critically important for our understanding of biology and fertility. And today I have a slew of questions that I'm excited to get to. Just to give you guys a basic overview of Matt and his background. In 2003, Matt developed a database for a Corvallis-based soil testing lab. And in 2011, he ended up buying the lab because he was so passionate about soil testing and wanted to take it to the next level. That lab is now called Earth Fort, and they've got a variety of products from Soil Fortify, Soil Revive, and Soil Provide. These are all products to support the biology in your soil. They, of course, do a variety of soil tests and soil biology analysis. He has also now started Earth Fort Africa, which was launched last year, bringing this technology and these products to Kenya. You can find Matt most days consulting with farmers of all backgrounds, helping them fix broken dirt and providing great biological soil analysis. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So what I want to dig into today is essentially something that's been a theme for us for a lot of the videos that we've been making, which is the two main vectors that we're constantly talking about in soil, which is fertility and biology.
Right.
So I've got a bunch of questions that I want to dig in here and get your perspective on how you see some of the roles of fertility and biology in cultivation, and let's dig into it.
Sure. Sounds good.
So to begin, how do you see the role of biology in soil? What is the most important aspect of biology in soil?
So soil is one of the three main components, or I should say the biology is one of the three main components of soil: biology, chemistry, and the physics of the soil. Mm-hmm. Those three things work together. The biological component, even though it's the technically smallest portion of the soil, is responsible for nutrient cycling. Mm-hmm. So the biology breaks down the mineral content of the soil, breaks down the organic matter, helps build the structure of the soil, does all of these things to help support the life of the plant, creating a habitat. And so its job essentially is this interaction with the plant to provide nutrients to the plants. So when I look at the microbiology, we're only looking at some aspects of the microbiology. We look at bacteria, we look at fungi, and we look at protozoa. Mm-hmm. There's, of course, other things going on in that soil: microarthropods, earthworms, other types of insects, nematodes, other things like that. But what we look at is the bacteria, fungi, and protozoa is the main things. And what we're really looking for is that there's this idea that each plant group has a particular balance of microbiology that it requires in order to be successful. And that balance between bacteria and fungi, is it fungally dominated, bacterial dominated, or balanced, kind of has an influence on the pH of the soil, an influence on the structure of the soil, which also influences how nutrients are processed. Mm-hmm. So plants don't eat fertilizer, they eat nutrients that are processed by microbiology, right? Yeah. So when you fertilize the soil, they convert it. If you don't fertilize the soil, well, that's fine too, because go out into the forest and nobody's fertilizing a forest, right? But the process is there. The plants are eating. So the main thing with the microbiology is getting the balance right for the plants that you're growing, and the conditions that you're working in. You know, are you doing container growing? Are you growing out in the ground? Is it a natural system? All those things play into it.
Fantastic. So there's one term that you used at the start of that I actually, I'm not sure I've really dialed in on, and you talked about the chemistry in the soil, but you talked about the physics.
Right.
Say more about what you mean by the physics within the soil biology.
Well, sure. I mean, the chemistry is the NPK and the nutrients that are available in the soil solution. The physics is the sand, silt, and clay content, the rock, is it compacted or is it loose? Is it sandy? Is it clay?
Got it.
Those things, those are the physics of the soil, the actual physical properties of the soil. And then from that, that's the base. And then from that, the chemistry and biological processes occur.
Fantastic. Yeah. One of the things that you also mentioned there that I think is something that we are constantly tracking in our cultivation here on the farm. It's also a topic that is fairly hotly debated, and there's another agronomist that we've connected with over the last 10 years named Bill McKibben, who's also got an interesting perspective on this, and that is pH. Understanding the extent to which the microbiology in the soil actually is not only affected by pH but also affects the pH.
Right.
Forever and a day, our golden rule here has been that between 6 and 7 is this broad side of the barn that we're trying to hit.
Sure.
That there's never been a time for us that it's like it's got to be 6.2 or we've got to be at 6.5. That is our perspective on pH. I'm curious what your take is on pH, because at the end of the day, the theme around pH certainly in cannabis cultivation, but in cultivation in general, is that you don't want to lock any nutrients out because you are down in the 5.5 or 5.2, or you're up at 7.5, and now you're starting to get out of range.
Correct.
What is your take on pH and the way that you think of pH in terms of nutrient availability and all that?
Yeah, so when I look at pH working with clients is like what you pointed out, is they don't want it to be out of the zone of comfort for the microbiology. Like if it's too low, that inhibits microbiology. If it's too high, it inhibits microbiological processes. Now here's the fun part. I think you're right. Hitting that sweet spot in that neutral zone is a really good idea in the broad sense of the pH of the soil. Now what's really interesting in this is, there's research papers that have been done years and years ago where they studied the rhizosphere of the plant. Microbiology can change the pH of that soil by 2 points in either direction, regardless of what the soil is doing. So, to my perspective is get the biology healthy and functional, keep the pH in a range where it's not going to hurt the biology, and then let it do its job in that root zone in relationship with the plant, because it can change it within the root zone. It can adjust it. And the general rule for me is, and this is a real basic thing, you can get into more of the biochemical processes, but the general rule of thumb is that bacteria create alkaline conditions, fungi create acidic conditions.
Fantastic.
And when you look at plants like a tree, the trees love acidic soil. Trees also love it to be very fungally dominated.
You think of that in forest floor.
Yeah, forest floor is really
mycelium.
acidic. Yeah, and you've got tons of, literally tons of fungi in the soil in a forest, whereas a pasture or a perennial grass, it likes it to be neutral, and you see a balance between the bacteria and fungi. And if you want to be a little one way or the other, let the biology do that work.
It's interesting. What we have seen for years now is when we start a flower cycle and we're catching runoff and we're measuring pH, and we go through week 1, week 2, right, all the way through that 9-week flower cycle, we just naturally see a trend where that soil wants to slowly climb and get more and more alkaline as the cycle goes and as that biology in that rhizosphere is doing the work. So we tend to see things climb, which would suggest, from your perspective, a more bacterially dominant, which is almost inevitable most of the time. The bacteria win that race seemingly every time. Even though we, with our compost teas, will go ahead and bake out a tea bag and let that hyphae bloom happen, right? And try to let that fungus get a head start.
Right.
But the bacteria seem to win the race long term over that 9-week flower cycle.
Yeah. And that's going to happen. It's going to shift, and the plant is in control.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if you're making sure that what needs to be there is there, then the plant determines how it's going to respond and react.
One question that I know has been sort of hotly contested, within our team and certainly in the ecosystem here, is this notion of having too much of any one input. So too much calcium, too much phosphorus. Oh, your magnesium's too high, your potassium's too high. In general, from a microbiological perspective, when you look, and I'm not talking about extreme cases where it's
Sure.
just, I mean, just saying just a little bit out of range, right? We're not talking about extremes here. Is it the case from your perspective, from a microbiological perspective, that an excess of a particular nutrient can hurt that biology, or is it the case that the communication that we're seeing between plants and microbiology with those root exudates that they're signaling that biology to say, hey, we're ready, send me some nitrogen, we need some phosphorus, whatever that communication that's happening there is. If there is an excess of a particular input, does that break down that communication, and can that hinder that microbiological process?
I think sure it could. I think it depends on the nutrient. It depends on the conditions in the soil. It depends on how much of too much are you talking about. Like I work. The example I like to use is here in the Willamette Valley, in the general agricultural scheme of things, people put lime down all the time. Put that calcium carbonate down to sweeten the soil up, because we have pretty acidic soils here because of the heavy clay and everything. They try and sweeten that soil up, but it is very disruptive. A gram of lime in a pound of soil will knock out about 40% of the microbiology.
Wow.
So
a gram
in a pound, so about 1/400th or whatever, ratio wise. So it's I tell people, don't put down tons of lime, put down pounds of lime per acre. If you need calcium. If you're trying to adjust the pH, get the biology working right for you. Flocculate the clays and get the biology working, and then you can adjust the pH.
Let the biology regulate the pH rather than
do the
something
work.
like a lime.
And that's the whole point. That's our whole work, is like people put too much energy into micromanaging a system, when if you just take care of the microbes, then you just have to do the macro management. So the answer is yes, it's very possible. The flip side of that is that microbes, part of their job is to collect nutrients, and if they're collecting nutrients and storing it in their structure, then they'll happily keep that out of harm's way as far as the plant goes. And when the plant needs it, like you say,
that's an interesting concept. Let me just double click on that real quick, because that's interesting. So you're talking about the biology becoming a storehouse for a nutrient, sequestering that.
Absolutely.
Let's use phosphorus as an example.
Yeah.
So now I've got the phosphorus that's being sequestered, right? At some point, when that plant needs that phosphorus, that biology releases that phosphate, makes it available to the plant. Plant pulls it in, takes it up. During that time, while that protozoa or amoeba or whatever it is that's sequestering that particular biology, are they still doing work? Do they have like this little storehouse, like a little vault that they can keep?
Well, it's more like it's integrated into their structure. We contain a lot of nutrients within our bodies. And those nutrients don't get released until we're dead. Mostly. I mean, we're like cows, we poop. And that's what happens, is that bacteria and fungi are responsible for collecting nutrients and storing it, and then protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, those types of things, the predators, come through and eat it. What happens is that those root exudates that you mentioned, the plant, depending on what the plant needs, it adjusts those exudates. It changes using the photosynthesis, CO2 from the atmosphere. It modifies the sugars that it's putting out to attract specific biology. And it's really crazy when you start looking at the root zone. It could be over here in this section of the root zone of a plant, it could be asking for nitrogen, and over here it could be asking for phos. And over here it could be asking for calcium. And so if the microbiology is present and working and those nutrients are there, then the predators are attracted. They eat the bacteria and fungi that need to be eaten to release whatever nutrients the plant is asking for.
So very, very interesting distinction here. You've got, just like we've got raptors in our area that are coming in and eating the field mice, and there's a predatory chain here that then is creating that nutrient cycling on a macro level. Now we're on a micro level, and what you're saying is within that same ecosystem. We've got these predators that are coming through and eating the biology in there and then excreting that waste, and that is then also bioavailable to the plants.
Correct.
What are some of the top predators within that rhizosphere that are responsible for that consumption?
I would say that the protozoa, flagellate and amoeba populations of protozoa in the soil profile are the main predators, and that's what we look at. That's what I look at. So
and the
that's
soil
my
analysis.
Emphasis. When we can analyze how many are home and can tell you how well that's going to be working.
Yeah.
There's, microarthropods are also responsible for processing nutrients. The nematodes are also, one nematode can produce an awful lot of nutrients. We don't do that testing, but we can point people in the lab to a lab. Usually most people are only interested in nematodes if they have root-feeding nematode problems, potential parasites.
Yeah.
So I figured out a long time ago, if the protozoa are good, everything is going to be fine.
From a predatory perspective, that's an indication. That's your canary in the coal mine, basically, to determine that.
Basically, it's just, do you have enough protozoa to do the job?
Yeah.
And
We inoculate with nematodes
Sure.
In veg, and we inoculate in flower just to make sure that they're in there.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. There are commercially available nematodes. Most of them are to protect the plant from insect pests.
Yeah.
That's usually how they come. But there's nothing wrong with having them in the system.
Yeah.
Chances are pretty good you don't have root-feeding nematodes. You may or may not need those.
Yeah.
Anyways, so especially in containers.
And I think that's the thing, right? So for us and for most people that are doing indoor cultivation, it's all about containers and
Sure.
and it's a different narrative, right? It's than growing in native soil
very
outside.
Very
different narrative.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that actually. So for us, we've gone through a huge range of experiments here over the last 10 years. We've tried just about every combination of everything,
I'm sure, yeah.
right? And one of the things that we've landed on, compost teas have been a thing that we've relied on heavily. We've tested our compost teas with you guys.
Right.
We've done analysis with you guys to understand what it is that we're actually brewing up in those biological brews.
Yep.
And what we've landed on with our compost teas is on day one of flower, we start the brewing process the day before flower load in. And when we load that room in, we inoculate all those plants with a nice biological brew to get that soil just humming. Mm-hmm. We throw the nematodes in. We'll throw in some Beauveria bassiana. We'll make sure that the bacillus bacteria are humming. We use a little armory product for that. And then our usual organic inputs for our teas. And then we'll do that again halfway through flower. So week 1 and about week 4 or 5, we'll re-inoculate the room to just charge it up.
Sure.
Now, between week 1 and week 4 or 5, when we re-inoculate, there's a gap, and then from that midway point to the finish line, there's another gap. It's not that we're not bringing any more biology to the party, but the real question that I always am curious about is what is antagonistic to these to the biology in the soil, and you've already clicked through a fairly good, robust list. But in the fertility program, mm-hmm. right, that we have, again, we've run the gamut. One of the places that we've landed is for what we consider insurance policy for the fertility in our soil. We're using a small dose of a controlled release fertilizer by a company called Beanstalk, and it's just that mineral-based, salt-based fertilizer.
Okay.
And one of the things that I remember from early days in my conversations with you when we were using Epsom salts to bring magnesium to the party, you said, okay, so just know that those are probably antagonistic to the biology in your soil. And one of the things that again, is hard to know definitively, short of like biologically testing our soil week 1, week 2, week 3, and taking core samples to just see how that is evolving, which, as I'm saying this aloud, I'm sure there's an experiment that's waiting to happen where we literally do a weekly test on soil to track it through a 9-week flower cycle.
You've got the budget.
Exactly. So what I would say is this. What the question is this. Sorry for the long ramble to get to the punchline on this, but one of the things that you have in this ecosystem is organic versus inorganic. People who are absolutely deaf on any mineral-based, salt-based fertility program. And then you've got folks that are like, look, the plants simply don't care. As long as the fertility is there, the biology will go in, they will do the work, they will mineralize it, they will make it bioavailable, they will break it down. And so what's the big issue? So the question to you is, how should we be considering the impact on a controlled release fertilizer, a salt mineral-based fertilizer, on biology?
Right. And that's a great question. So, the reality is that microbiology is designed to break down rock. So if you're bringing in mineral component that is not synthetic, okay, and that's the danger, right? Is when you bring in a synthetic petroleum-based type of product, those tend to be fairly toxic to the life.
Mm-hmm.
They're designed to force their way into the plant roots, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not interested in the natural process.
Mm-hmm.
But if you introduce a mineral component, even the gypsum or
glacial rock, basalt.
Glacial rock and basalt, those are fine. It just realize that it takes the biology a while to break it down.
Yeah, exactly.
But
those would be examples of
those are actual
mineral-based, rock
dust.
rock
dusts,
yeah,
right? No, we're talking about now when you're dealing with like copper sulfate or magnesium sulfate. Those are salts, mineral salts. Mm-hmm. And the key is not that you can't use those things. The key is balance.
Yeah.
It's don't do so much that you cause disruption. Because salted soils, you put salt in the soil and it disrupts microbiology. I mean, salt was used as a preservative. And when we say salt, we're talking about these mineral salts and not talking about sodium.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
It's just... everybody says, oh, I don't put any sodium in it. It's like, well, no, that's one type of salt.
Right.
So don't overdo it. If you're doing a slow release, a minor amount that is slowly made available and the biology is working. The other thing I tell people all the time too is this is what I've learned over these last couple decades. Mm-hmm. The plant is going to tell you when you screw up, especially in your industry. Those plants are so responsive.
It's incredible.
It's like you do something wrong and you know it the next day or maybe even sometimes the same day.
It's incredible.
So if you got a program that's working and you're taking care of the biology, you're making nutrients available, you're in a container, your job is to make sure everything is there.
Yeah.
In an amount that is usable to the plant ultimately. You reset it every year or, have to recharge it after every cycle. So the idea is, disturbing the soil, too much water, too much nutrient of any type that might be disruptive. That's what you got to watch for.
Yeah.
It's really all about balance.
Yep.
Biology, and again, biology doesn't care. Is it organic material? Is it inorganic material? In fact, the biology releases inorganic nutrients into the soil solution.
Yeah.
And then it's that soil solution then interacts with the root exudates and the moisture and pH of that soil to get converted, or it's pulling it out of the atmosphere and storing it and then bringing it back in these processes. My favorite book is, the textbook on microbiology and biophysics and biochemistry.
Which is what?
I think that's what it's called. I'd have to look it up the name. I can get it for you.
Yeah.
But it's a book the textbook on soil microbiology.
We'll definitely have a link in the show notes for that because I would love for our viewers to have a reference to that.
Ecology and biochemistry, I think is what it is. So it's a great book.
Yeah.
And I reference it. There's 2 whole chapters just on nitrogen. So
So when we're looking at this issue of balance and we're looking at the relationship here between biology and fertility, one of the other areas here that is an important regulator for keeping that rhizosphere healthy and happy is moisture levels in that soil, right? So one of the questions that I wanted to get your take on today was, when it comes to optimizing that biology and keeping things cycling, when you look at them in a container, specifically this is a container question.
Got it. Yeah.
If you're going to err on the side of that substrate remaining on the moist side of things versus on the dry side of things. Let's understand here what your take is when it comes to the biology there and how we want to optimize that.
Right. Yeah. Moisture is one of those aspects that is really important. Moisture content of the soil, it really, okay. So I'll just say what happens to the biology when the soil is out of balance. And then you can start to understand why you might go one way or the other.
Okay.
So when a soil is really dry, like it starts drying down, it gets less than, 25, 30%, starts getting into the 20 to 15% moisture or less. That lack of moisture slows the biology down. They start going dormant, right? They need the soil solution. These are aquatic organisms. Basically they're aquatic.
That's an interesting filter to put it on.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to have enough moisture. If it's not enough moisture in our desert systems, for example, the activity of the microbiology is so close to the root and only present when there's moisture.
Yeah.
You look at Death Valley, this barren wasteland, the rains come and it explodes.
Yeah. All
that life comes around.
Yeah.
So if it gets too dry, then things slow down and you don't get that process. But there's nothing hazardous about it other than the plants will also slow down.
Sure. Everything
right?
just
dries down. It just slows down. Things go dormant.
Yeah.
Now, when the moisture gets too much, now that's when you start running into trouble.
Go
when you have saturated soils, it'll go anaerobic. And then what happens is that the biological processes shift and they start losing that oxygen because of oversaturation of water. The biology will continue to be active, but then you start getting facultative anaerobes and true anaerobic organisms, and they start doing the nutrient cycle differently. Instead of slowing down and going to sleep, they go into hyper mode and they start producing things like phenols and alcohols, and they start releasing nutrients. You start getting nitrous oxide produced and ammonia being released straight into the atmosphere, phosphine gas. All your nutrients start getting blown off in a non-available form from that process.
Yeah.
So if I were to lean towards the dry side, the lean side, don't let it get too saturated.
Yeah.
Keep it dry. And then also that puts stress on the plants, and that will draw in the disease organisms as well. A lot of our disease organisms live in that zone where it's facultative anaerobe, E. coli, salmonella, things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of the fungal diseases don't start manifesting until you've got reduced oxygen in the soil and stress on the plants.
And as a practical filter to just sort of understand that, not only for us but for our viewers, when we're looking at containers, right? As a general reference point for us, we grow primarily in 7-gallon fabric pots for flower, right? And a traditional, and again, this is different on week 1 versus week 5, but the maturity of the plants. But as a general rule of thumb, when we deploy, we want to make sure that we get some runoff. 10% has always sort of been our rule of thumb in terms of just having a nominal amount of pass through, right? Some amount, not just watering just enough and having no runoff. That always felt to me like it was not enough. But I'm again curious to hear your opinion on that. So we water to get a bit of runoff. We collect that runoff to just check EC and pH. So there's a practical side of runoff as well, just to kind of gauge what's going on in that rhizosphere. And then we'll let that plant process that deployment of water or tea or whatever it's gotten for at least 2, sometimes 3 days. And the reference point for us is twofold. One is just picking up the pot and just checking the weight of the pot. So physically actually inspecting that pot. And secondly, just feeling around that top couple of inches of that pot, engaging, knowing that there's always going to be more moisture down below or at the center core of that than there is in that top feeder root zone. And then we'll go ahead and deploy again. So having a cadence where you're allowing, we have always sort of thought of it as like when you put food on a plate, you eat the food, you're not ready to just throw a bunch more food right on that. You digest it, you process that before you get your next meal. And that's how we've sort of traditionally thought about things. Is there I guess, two parts to that question. The runoff question in terms of what you typically like to see in indoor cultivation for runoff, what that gauge is for you. And then secondly, is there a different metric that we or any of our viewers could use to gauge when it's time to go ahead and water again, so that you're not leaving that plant too wet and running the risk of that anaerobic condition?
Yeah, so as far as the runoff goes, I just think of the physics question of it. In a natural system, a good healthy soil, you're going to have a portion of that water is going to want to run down into the soil deep.
In the aquifer kind of thing, like just penetrating, just keep going.
Penetrate and go and
Yeah.
fill aquifers if
Yeah.
that's the case,
Sure.
or just be deeper. And then, so what you want to, it's actually a good indication that you've got structure that's good enough to allow water to infiltrate the whole profile. So I think that's fine. I think that you're spot on there. The measuring, moisture content in a soil is very tricky. They do make meters that could be helpful, moisture meters that you can stick down into the soil to see how well it's doing. The touch test is good too, but those meters, unfortunately, the good ones cost thousands of dollars to get a good moisture meter. Or you could do your own moisture test occasionally in the microwave, but that's another story.
Wait, now you've got me curious. A moisture test in the microwave?
Right. So the way we do moisture testing is we take a volume of sample of the soil and we weigh it on a scale, and then we put it in a drying oven for overnight, and then we weigh it again, and you calculate how much is lost, and that's the moisture. Well, you can do that in a microwave oven over in 5 to 10 minutes. You can microwave the soil and weigh it before and after.
Interesting.
And then get the same kind of moisture reading. So it's, and I know you've got sensitive enough scales, and you probably have plenty of microwaves around that you could do that. We usually recommend there's ceramic crucibles that you use for doing that.
Before we even get to the ceramic crucible or the $1,000 moisture probe, although cue the Googling for the $1,000 moisture probe here. Yeah. One other, I just want to go a little bit deeper on this moisture question. When we're looking at, even if we did have that $1,000 moisture probe, right? Is that moisture probe in a root zone that is, let's say it's 18 inches deep, right? And this is a plant that's been in this pot long enough so that the roots have actually, really migrated throughout that pot and the root horizon has expanded. What is the gold standard for gauging the moisture level? Is it the top 2 inches? Is it getting all the way down 7, 8 inch? Like, where is that probe actually designed to measure, and how do you gauge? Because if I'm testing the top 3 inches, I'm going to get a very different reading than I'm testing the bottom 3 inches.
Right.
Is that fair?
I think that you want to do is the whole profile and look at the different zones and what's going on, so that no zone is too much or too little, right? And so measure deep, measure the edges, measure interior, measure the top, and just kind of get an average, and use that tool. Again, this is one of those questions where, like, if you've been doing it a long time, you've kind of developed a feel for it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important too, because there's the whole other aspect of all of this. We talk technical,
Reading
scientific, theoretical ideas, or the principles, but it's practical experience is going to be the most important tell. Yeah. Right. And 100%. The plant. Pay attention to the plant. Pay attention to the conditions. If you start seeing any kind of symptom, pay attention for things. If it got overwatered. Or if it got underwatered.
But the main takeaway from your perspective is, when in doubt, err on the side of letting it be a little bit drier than if you're concerned of it being too wet. That's a bigger concern because of what you can produce unintentionally by leaving those wet conditions.
Correct.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. Here's an interesting question that I think is something that is related to pH, but I'm curious what the take on this is. So with TH, potential hydrogen, we're looking at the TEC, the total exchange capacity of soil, right? How do hydrogen ions affect nutrient uptake? On a recent soil report, we saw that we had, in previous soil samples, we had seen fairly good hydrogen ions, and on another one we had gotten basically to 0, and on that same soil sample, it came in at 7.2. So a relatively basic soil sample with almost no hydrogen ions. Our total exchange capacity had taken a hit. I correlated the higher pH with a drop in our exchange capacity, and I may have been completely misreading that. And so I wanted to get your take on how we should think about ionic exchange capacity in soil in general, and then how that relates to pH. Coming back to some of that.
Yeah, so you say TEC, most people know that as CEC, right? Cation exchange capacity is total exchange capacity. So,
but we are talking about the cations, right?
It's
the ionic exchange.
It's the free ionic content. That's why we test for electrical conductivity as well, to make sure to see what's available, what's going on. So pH, there's the chart for pH and nutrient availability that gardeners and agriculturalists have used for almost 100 years now. That part of it is legit, especially if you're not paying attention to the microbiology. It's really important. But if you're paying attention to the microbiology, those nutrients in solution, they're available to the microbes. They can eat it and bring it up and cycle it. They're moving those things around and pulling it off of the surfaces of the sand, silt, and clay. That's the biological process, is to get that stuff off and into solution, and then interacting in the root zone. So, as far as the hydrogen stuff, I did some work with some Germans who are really, really into that whole thing, and I never really got into it because I felt like that level of micromanagement isn't as critical because, it's just like, hey, the pH, the EC, and the microbial population, your job is just to make sure that the nutrients that plant wants are around or in there somehow, whether it's a mineral or a free solution, if you're putting chelated nutrients in there, whatever it might be, foliar feeding, making sure that the nutrients are there. And that the biology is functioning. Then you don't have to worry about it too much. That's my take on it.
Okay, so just so that I'm understanding you correctly, exchange capacity is not something to ignore or to say there's nothing there to discuss. It's more to look at it from a practical perspective of the average person who's cultivating, whether it's at scale or at home. Get your biology right. And in some ways, that takes care of or is more important than worrying about my hydrogen ions or dealing with that total exchange capacity in my soil. Right. Don't worry as much about that.
Don't worry so much about that when you've incorporated the biological component.
Got it.
The other thing I'll say is that when I look at chemistry tests, what I'm really looking for is too much or too little of any of the nutrients so that you know what needs to be addressed, so that you're not overwhelming the biology or underwhelming it, and that's based on your plant. There's not too many chemistry tests that are, hyper focused on cannabis per se, right? So you're going to get like grass recommendations or wheat or corn or something like that. So it's, those chemistry tests and the CEC, all of that is really about how to manage the soil chemistry for growing a plant when you don't have the biological piece there.
Interesting.
So that's traditional, or not even traditional, it's the modern conventional agricultural approach, which is we're going to force feed these plants, we need to know what is in that soil so we know that we need to fertilize.
And when you're running compost teas and you're running biologicals, it really takes care of that issue, and you don't
really
have to worry
does.
about
if
it as
you've
much.
got good nutrient load, good organic matter, and you're taking care of that part of it, you're creating this own little microsystem.
So let's talk about the the salad bar buffet for the microbes.
Yeah.
There is a range of food that we've talked about over the years. One of the products that you developed to optimally feed the microbes is the Soil Revive. It's a humic-based product that we've used for years. The gold standard for dropping a compost tea bag and getting that ready to brew up for 6, 12, 24 hours, whatever the time domain is, has been blackstrap molasses forever and a day.
Right.
I know you have a perspective on blackstrap molasses as well as a microbial food. We've used milk sugars. We've used yucca. We have used a range of different carbs to stoke the biology and make sure they've got what they need.
Yep.
What's your take on biology food and how should folks think about that?
So obviously for 20 years I've been helping people make teas or extracts, find foods, and that's part of the reason why Earthfort was started, was to create find the right kind of food resources that would help build up the biology, and also finding fertility products that were biologically friendly.
Yeah.
Right. In addition to food resources. So
like our BE Plus.
Yeah,
right?
BE Plus is
shout
like,
out BE Plus.
Man, that stuff is that's the kitchen sink
right?
and everything.
It's
right.
Perfect.
Going after it, and very nice product. The humic acid is one of the tools that I like, not because it's directly a food for microbes, but because of what it does to the soil nutrients. It has a chelating factor, and it can help break up those salts that are naturally occurring in the soil, because salts want to bond together. Even if you don't put salt fertilizer in, those nutrients in solution, they want to stick together, because you got positive, negative ions. You want to bring them together. The organic compounds of the humic acid help break those up and make them bioavailable. Right. And then fungi loves to break down carbon even further. So it is a good source for fungal food. So then you need the simple and complex carbohydrates is one aspect. And blackstrap molasses, for whatever, simple sugars are going to be bacterial foods, and complex sugars are going to be fungal foods.
And that's basically the distinction there between those two.
And that's it. And it's like, within that spectrum, are you using molasses or table sugar? Are you using milk solids? Or are you using, whatever?
Yucca,
Or yucca. Well, yucca has some other properties as well, nutritionally.
The saponins.
As well as a component that helps with the structure of the soil and water, the way it affects water. So it's a spreader sticker. Right. So, so I look at all those things. I put sea minerals. So the new product is Fortify.
Let's talk about that.
Revive is the humic acid and kelp. And complex carbohydrate. The Fortify, I added some protein-based fertility in the form of fish powder. And then also add sea minerals. So we get all those micronutrients, and that product is killing it in Africa, right? And also in containers. It's a great, because it's such a low application rate, right? And it's very complementary to other fertility things. It just helps it make it more efficient. But it could be, in certain cases, a standalone. In Africa, it's all by itself.
Amazing.
A pound an acre.
And people are just using it in their farming programs there.
Just
mixing it right.
Usually apply it at
basically top dressing it into the rows
as they're planting.
And
then and it can also be used as a food resource to charge up the compost before you brew a tea. And also brewing tea, and and that's all the ingredients.
That's where we would put Revive.
If you ever look at the ingredient list over the years, it's fish, kelp, and humic acid. That's been the main thing, and then there's all the other little things. So I would say that understand, actually look it up. If you're using one of these things, look it up and see what it actually is, because I know some people think that the humic acid is a carbohydrate, and it's not true. It is not a carbohydrate. and it's carbon, and it has carbohydrates in it, but it's not classified as a complex sugar.
Interesting. How do we think about humics in terms of their classification?
They're their own thing.
Ah.
So humic, fulvic, oleic, those types of organic acids, because they're so broken down, right, and so advanced. I mean, they're on their way to coal.
Interesting.
Kind of level of carbon. Right. So at one time they probably were carbohydrates, plant-based of some sort.
Right.
And they get processed over time.
It's just further along that continuum of their breakdown.
Yeah. It's either on the way to coal, oil, or diamonds.
Incredible. I always have understood that the fulvic acid is a refined version of humics, that the humic acid is the raw material that is used to produce fulvics. I'm mistaken on that.
Yeah, it's not so much. It's I think it's a spectrum of concentration of age.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the lighter the color, the newer it is. I don't know if that's correct or not. I've talked to people. That's a fun rabbit hole to go down in and of itself.
Humics versus fulvics?
No,
or just fulvics?
Humic substances and humic acids. There's a website, the Humic Substances Society of America.
You're kidding.
There's a website.
Of course
you can go and read the research, and it is really fascinating.
Amazing.
About the whole conversation about it, how to test it, what does it mean, how are they actually made? Like, those questions are not answered. We don't have all those answers about what these things are.
Incredible.
But what we do know is that if we don't put them in Revive and Fortify, product doesn't work as good.
Okay.
And it doesn't do some of the things. So we know enough.
Yeah.
So my opinion is, how it's made and how it's presented to the consumer is really important.
The humics, can I put amino acids in with humic acids as a chelating element?
Amino acids are now you're getting into another realm, because that's protein based as opposed to carbon.
So the reason why I'm asking is because of the fish that you use, what Tay uses, and the amino acids I know for Tay's product and the BE Plus is a huge driver in terms of chelating calcium and making things available. How should we think about the role of humics in my soil and the role humic acids and the role of amino acids? Completely different or overlap?
They're doing different things. There's overlap, and they have different roles and different functions. I meant to say aminos because that's an important part of it too. I don't put as much emphasis as Tay does on the aminos. Right. I'm more broad.
Yep. But how should we think about the role that the humics and then aminos are playing for us?
So the humics are chelating agent that are going to help break up salts.
Yep.
And I don't think amino acids have that capability because they don't have that same kind of complex carbon chain. Amino acids, though, are a huge source of protein and nutrients. And that is one of the big things for them, and those different and how they affect the metabolism of these other organisms is probably more important than as a chelating agent specifically, although that's a whole. I haven't gone down too deep. So
interesting, but which is fair. But one of the things that you talked about earlier on is the way that all of these different components in the soil become building blocks for these organisms. Right? In the same way that for humans, we've got calcium now that's stored in our bones and all those different components. The amino acids, in terms of a food source for the biology, the microbiology in there, specifically we're talking about the proteins and their ability to actually metabolize those to actually build the structure of that organism. Is that a fair way to conceptualize the way that these microorganisms would be using an amino acid?
Yeah,
I'm taking my protein shake after I work out.
Exactly.
Is it a similar sort of like construct?
Thing. And remember too that the protein, the way that the microorganisms store nutrients is in the form of protein, which is the amino acids within them. Okay, so you've got amino acids with all the nutrients attached to it and all these different things, and they have an effect on the physiology of the organism as well as when they get eaten and those nutrients are broken free in the root zone. then those get taken up by the plant and are utilized either as a raw nutrient or as another piece of the building block. Amino acid, it's all that's, DNA is that, right? That's another one of the many amino acids.
Fascinating.
So it's I think they're critical for everything, and they're so important that I usually forget to even mention them because they're just everywhere. They have to be there.
Amazing.
Fully integrated. So thanks for bringing it up because that's really
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Really
So in indoor cultivation, one of the things that we that I mentioned a little bit ago that is an ongoing question for us that we've been trying to experiment with and continue to balance is how to maintain optimal levels of microbiology in our containers. Right. What is the actual cadence that we need to be running re-inoculations? Is it enough to just one and done and you're good to go? I understand that it's multifactorial in terms of what the different environmental conditions are that would either support that biology or eliminate that biology in some way, shape, or form. But if conditions, let's run two hypotheticals. Let's run an optimal and a suboptimal.
Okay.
In the optimal condition where soil moisture levels, fertility rates, environment, everything is just literally the optimal environment for this biology. And we haven't tested this soil to know what the endemic population is. It's bagged soil that we just dump into that container. We're not sure what the biology is in that soil, if there's any at all. So we go ahead and inoculate that 7-gallon pot with a compost tea. What do we, or what do anyone that's watching this this video need to keep in mind for a 9-week flower cycle? If the conditions are optimal, is that one inoculation of biology going to be a self-sustaining engine that's just going to keep going that entire time? Or are we going to have to continue to stoke that through those 9 weeks?
Yeah, so
this is the optimal situation.
Right, optimally. The real question becomes, is there enough food resource in that container to maintain a biological population through the course of time? That's the real question. The biology will be fine. Right, it'll grow, but it will only grow if there's food resource available. Now, the plant itself will give it some food resource through the exudates, but then the mineral content of that soil has to be enough, right? And keeping everything else the same. If the food resource is there and the plant is doing well, then the microbes will respond to the needs of the plant. They'll eat the nutrients, and you'll get through the whole cycle. Presumably that is very possible. Okay.
And in a suboptimal scenario where you have some antagonistic elements there to that biology.
So in a suboptimal situation in a container, you want to be feeding and inoculating throughout the course of the cycle. The important thing with that is if you are going to micromanage it outside of the natural cycle of the plant, you have to be really sensitive to the needs of the plant at those different stages. Like you said, towards the end of the cycle through the flower, the pH starts to drop, or no, it starts to go up, right? So you're getting alkaline conditions. So, if it starts out fungal, because I like to, and that's the other thing too, is if it's balanced bacteria and fungi, then the plant will adjust. It'll encourage fungi or encourage bacteria through the course, and the protozoa are there. They'll do their job, and it'll be fine. In a suboptimal, you don't want to get too crazy because you could easily overdo it if you put too much fungal food at the wrong time. It could throw things off, or if you put too much bacterial food at the wrong time, or you overload it with bacteria and it eats all of your fungi, But then there's disease pressure and all these other things too that, I like to do foliar applications on, if there's signs of disease or insects.
Let me double click really quickly on this notion of the throttle of food that would support either bacterial or fungal throughout a flower cycle, because that's a really interesting concept.
Right.
When we've always thought bacterial dominant for veg and fungally dominant for flower. That's been sort of probably a overly simplified and facile version. Because
but it's Probably close.
Okay, great.
Presumably.
Perfect. So if we're sort of, trying to really, support that fungally dominant microbiology through the flower cycle, are there things that you would encourage in terms of feeding and supporting that fungally dominant versus the bacterially dominant?
Yeah, I would use Revive as a food resource to really focus on the fungi. Fortify will also work, but because of that fish element, it could also be encouraging some bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
So Fortify early, and then maybe, and you'd have to experiment. You haven't used the product yet, so we don't know how it's going to work with cannabis in containers. I know what happens out in the field.
Sure.
It doesn't matter as much, Like with corn, we'll do 2 applications, so like one at planting and then one just as it's going into the ears start to form. We'll do another application to help boost everything. That may not apply in cannabis containers, but so those foods. That's why I created the foods that I did, because it feeds all of it, but with an emphasis on fungi.
Yeah.
In bacteria, actually, you don't need to do anything for bacteria most of the time. Bacteria is going to grow.
So the takeaway when we're thinking about stoking biology specifically for the flower cycle is the bacteria will do their thing regardless.
Yeah.
They're going to multiply by the trillions,
literally,
the gazillions.
Yeah.
The fungal population in that rhizosphere needs more support and needs more help from a cultivation perspective.
Yeah.
And a humic acid, in your opinion, is going to be one of the
humic acid and complex carbs.
Complex carbs. What would be another example besides besides Revive that you would look at as a good food source for the fungus in that?
The kelp is a good source of that, because it'll feed the fungi. I don't usually. I'm trying to think of what would be a specific. So a lot of the carbs that would feed fungi are slow. So like you could use oats or oat flour or something like that that would help. But that usually, it takes 2 weeks for an oat flour to get a response out.
Break down and get it going.
Yeah. So it's that combination of things that's really important to get the fungal growth, because Revive and Fortify will grow a lot of fungi in a couple days.
Let's talk about kelp for a minute, because kelp for us over the last 10 years has been a really important input that we've relied on, both in a soluble form as well as kelp meal, which we've used in our compost tea recipes. Right. We've also used it just as a top dress. So within the cannabis ecosystem, periodically there are these boogeymen that appear in dark corners that you then have to contend with and figure out. We had the Aspergillus boogeyman a couple of years ago that came out through testing. And the current boogeyman that has been lurking in the hallways is known as heavy metals.
Oh, yeah.
And heavy metals within testing of cannabis now is one of those things where you can't remediate for it. So if you fail for arsenic or lead or cadmium, that's it. You have to destroy that crop.
Once it's in the plant.
Yeah. And so, exactly. And so one of the things that we've looked at are really 2 things. On the upstream side, looking at lab tests on products to see where heavy metal levels are so that we can understand, is this like one of the dirty dozen that we just don't want to mess with? Even though there are probably some great benefits from that particular input, the risk outweighs the reward, and so we're just going to not use that input.
Right.
Kelp has fallen into that category for us with arsenic, I believe, is one of the high elements in kelp.
Yeah.
Now, arsenic in and of itself is not the boogeyman. It's just the concentrated levels that ultimately make their way into that flower that then ultimately shows up in the report. One of the things that we have used now for quite a long time is biochar.
Okay.
And biochar is one of the inputs that we've been blending in with our soil as we reuse it and we re-amend it. Biochar has just been a bulk product that we blend into our 15-yard bulk soil blends.
Okay.
And we think of biochar as an antidote to the heavy metal hydration, if that's actually a word. My question is that false? And secondly, the second part of that question would be, are there things that we or anyone could do in their soil to help mitigate any concerns around heavy metals making their way to toxic levels in the soil?
Yeah. So the answer, let's start with the biochar, because that's an interesting point of reference. The biochar has that potential, but you can't assume that it's actually doing what you think it's doing without validating that idea with testing of the soil. With heavy metals being such an issue, it really is. I'm surprised there isn't like 10 heavy metal labs in Oregon alone. I know there's a couple, but testing the soil, testing your inputs is really critical in that regard. Now, biochar may or may not be a good tool. I think that presumably a well-made biochar, and there's no definition, so that's a hard question to answer in and of itself.
Right.
But it has that potential because of the nature of it. It also has a potential to be a point source of heavy metals, because you don't know where it came from and what was in the plant material that it was made from, and those you don't know. Right. So getting things tested. It's interesting. I haven't heard of arsenic in kelp. That's interesting. So it'd be interesting to see what's the source of that kelp and how it's processed. Right. Humic acid is an amazing tool for chelating and sequestering heavy metals. That's part of its little job. And also fungi. I mean, I've wiped out arsenic in field testing up in Washington State. They had there's an island, Vashon Island, in the Puget Sound, downwind from an old smelting plant, and they had huge amounts of arsenic in their soils.
Incredible.
Just from downwind, and the state went in and replaced all of the soil in the suburban setting. But out in the forest, they didn't do anything with it. So this little researcher did some testing in the field and got the fungal content up in that soil, and it took care of, pulled the arsenic out of circulation. We've done, and we've also done cesium and other things with radioactive materials. I have a book. This is called Metal Ions and Fungi. There's a whole book on it. It's a scientific research that shows that fungi is very, very important in sequestering and immobilizing heavy metals and other types of unwanted things.
It's incredible.
In the environment, lead, and things like that. So.
I've heard of these Superfund sites essentially being completely scrubbed with by simply using a fungal inoculation. The mycelium, make their way through that entire acreage, and they literally clean the soil.
Yeah, they do. You have to be careful though in that regard, because it's a living system. What happens to all of those nutrients when you kill the fungi? Right. So that's what they
get released back.
That's it. In Fukushima, they noticed the mushrooms in Fukushima were pulling in the cesium. But then the pigs were coming through and eating the mushrooms.
Oh boy.
And then getting contaminated, and then they were spreading it actually further. And they saw similar things with like other types of hyperaccumulators. They had problems with Ukraine, with Chernobyl, with the sunflowers. Right. The sunflowers are great hyperaccumulators, pulled that, but then it got into the seed, and the birds came through and ate the seed and spread it.
Oh boy.
Right. So they made it worse. So you guys are in a particularly tight situation, and I think that it's really going to come down to testing and monitoring and looking at all of your inputs and making sure that you're building your soils in such a way, but keeping that fungi going and making sure that it doesn't die in the process while it's accumulating. Some of it's going to get eaten, and that's potentially a danger, right? If the fungi pulls in all those heavy metals, and then they get consumed, and then it gets released to the plant in that process, and then you've got a hyperaccumulator now dumping that right into the root zone of the plant.
You mentioned the humics being another tool for sequestering those heavy metals. Is there, within that context, is there where does it go ultimately when it's sequestered by those humics? How does it ultimately?
It's attached to that carbon chain.
It's now bound.
Yeah,
got it.
Yeah, it's just binding up with the carbon.
Okay.
Those complex carbon chains.
Yeah, it sounds like the humics are one of those sort of magical inputs in terms of being a multifaceted tool in the soil
does have
web.
multiple roles, and that's because humic substances are created through the biological and chemical processes of organic matter breakdown. So they're part of that system, and when you're dealing with human-made systems, it's missing, right? Because you don't have that decades of organic matter in the buildup of the humic content of the soil. So you need to introduce it, and that's what helps keep soils clean, because that's part of the role of soil in nature is to clean water too, right? And so that's all part of it, right?
Love it.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of transition here. There's a perfect opportunity to sort of move into, where Earth Fort comes in with respect to testing.
Right.
So in general, if you can't test it, you can't measure it, you can't manage it. But when you are testing it and you are able to analyze it and you are able to get all of the data that you need from your soil tests, you can then make informed decisions about how you want to proceed with any cultivation practice, whatever that is.
Correct.
So I know that biological testing has really been your niche, not as much focused on just general blocking and tackling of soil reports with the macros and the micronutrients. That's just not really your jam.
No, we don't.
Right? Yeah. So what is it about, help me understand and help our viewers understand, when it comes to biological testing, how you guys do it, how often you think it should happen, and what some of the benefits are to testing soil through your lab.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's really, there's very few labs that test for bacteria and fungal population in an accessible way, and there's even fewer labs that test for protozoa. So we fill a niche. Part of the testing that we do is direct microscopy, and then we have developed, in collaboration with another group, a new form of testing that should talk about, because one of the things that I brought for show and tell is a way to test your bacteria and fungi in real time using a cell phone.
What?
Yeah, I know, you're going to be excited. So,
my goodness, you heard it here first. Cell phone biology testing.
Cell phone biology testing. So I brought it. It's and it's not new. It's been out in the market, but we've been helping this company make sure dial it in, right? So it uses a
so it's useful data.
Yeah, useful data. So we do pH, we do EC to make sure that it doesn't hurt the biology. We do bacteria and fungi total population. That's what we're talking about.
You do active.
And then we do aerobic content, so we can determine of the bacteria and fungi that's there, how much of it is metabolizing oxygen. So how aerobic is that soil? Is it too high? Well, there's no such thing as too high. You can't overdo it, but you can underdo it.
Yeah.
And that's direct microscopy. The phone thing doesn't do aerobic. Yeah. And then protozoa is, that's a dilution, a complicated process to take the soil and grow the protozoa and then identify the presence or absence and then determine what's the most probable number per gram.
I always remember that part of the testing is always the part that took the longest, because
it takes about 5 days.
That's what we would always wait for the protozoal count to come through after that.
That's right. And so what we're telling you is, do you have enough bacteria and fungi, and what balance is it in? And then we discuss what are you growing? What are your conditions? What are you trying to achieve? Because those numbers, we give you baseline numbers, like what should it be for perennials, or for trees or whatever. But we always include consulting a phone call with the testing. So we don't let people go hang out to dry, so to speak, because there's not a lot of information out there about what to do with that information.
So you're providing the soil report and a consult that goes with that.
So they'll put it into context.
Yeah.
for
and
you.
provide the recommendations or say, hey, your soil's perfect or it's not.
And also explore what tools do you have available? What do you want to be able to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Because then we can point, because when you do testing for the Department of Transportation in some sort of restoration project, they just want to know that the initial thing is good enough.
Yeah.
And then they're done, right? Whereas you would want to do more. To finish the thought, the frequency of testing, okay, is honestly, it's your budget.
Yeah.
Right. Now with the field lab that we've kind of put together, then it changes the whole thing. Because what the field lab does is we charge $50 for a soil life test, EC, pH, total bacteria, total fungi. That's $50 test if you send it to us. If you buy the field lab, the materials to do that, not including your time, of course, but just the materials is less than $10 a sample. Mm-hmm. So now I open the door for maybe a lot more like that weekly question, right? What's going on a weekly basis? So, so I usually tell people test at the beginning of the growing cycle to determine where you're at so that you know what foods to put in or if you need to inoculate, and then test at the end of the season. But for you guys, I don't like for containers, if those containers get put back into a big pile and then left over and then rebuilt, then you're just testing at the beginning of every cycle to make sure that you put in what you need, and then from there you monitor it based on what's going on with the plants.
Exactly. And that's basically what we've been doing is just testing along the way. But what I'm realizing is that, when it comes to real-time data so that you can make good informed decisions along the way, what you're describing right now sounds phenomenal in terms of an opportunity to get that real-time feedback.
Yeah, and it's really simple. There's also a link on our YouTube channel to you can see it in action as well, and it's on our website. It's available for sale. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to start doing their own field testing, get that data. They can always reach out to us and ask questions. No problem with that, because usually an email or a short phone call. But for me, it's exciting because I can take this thing to Africa with me, and we got them.
You can empower all those farmers that you're working with down there.
We got them in Haiti. We got them in Uganda. We got them in Kenya, Rwanda, Zambia. Just getting it out there. There's some in Europe now. So and then
tell me the name of the product again.
It's called Microbiometer.
Microbiometer,
and it's a Dr. Fitzpatrick, who has since passed away, sadly. She developed this tool years and years ago, actually. It uses spectrophytometry to determine, because the bacteria and fungi are different density, so you can analyze it with a spectrophytometer and differentiate the bacteria from the fungi, and then convert that to biomass.
Incredible.
And so we've helped them with analyzing it. They compared it to Solvita testing. They compared it to flow-through cytometry. They compared it to our direct microscopy. So we helped them dial it all in as part of the process.
And you believe that the data that farmers in Africa or farmers in the Willamette Valley are going to be able to get from this is useful data that will give you a good indication.
It's very good.
And then I'm assuming that with these kits that you're getting, there is a range where you're able to look at your results and then look at the key or the ledger and go,
absolutely.
Okay, we're in optimal range, we're low, we're high, whatever the case is.
Yep. And that's evolving.
Fantastic.
The app that they use on the phone is evolving, and pretty soon, I don't know if it's going to be this year or not. I don't know where they're at exactly.
Yeah.
They're actually going to put the data in the format that we've been presenting the data over the last
So there's
20
parity
years.
there between.
So you'll look at the data from our report.
Yep.
And it's the same that they're going to put in the app. So you're going to see exactly what you would see if you sent it into us.
That's absolutely phenomenal. Matt, this has been absolutely incredible. I really appreciate you making time for us today and sharing all of your knowledge. I know that we have more questions that we would love to cover, and we'd love to have you back to cover some of those. But before we wrap up here, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share with folks any website, YouTube, Instagram, anything else that you'd like to share about what Earthfort does, and just make sure that people can find you. And obviously we'll put it in the show notes, and people will have the links there. But
yeah, I mean, we have a website, earthfort.com, has everything on it. All the information about testing, all of the products, as well as the field lab, are all there with details. We do have a YouTube channel. I think it's Earthfort LLC, YouTube and Instagram.
Okay.
I think there's a Facebook page too, but just go to Instagram.
Yeah.
And
yep.
No Twitter. I don't do that, or X, whatever they call it.
Yeah, no,
so
we
it's
haven't
just
done that either.
so it's just YouTube, Instagram, and our main page.
Sure.
I don't know what to say. We're also in Corvallis, and we're open during the week. You can stop by if you're local.
What if we're not local? What if I'm in, the East Coast, or I can just send a soil sample?
Oh yeah, no, the information, you just mail it.
Yep.
It's all the information and costs are on the website. It's all right there. I mean, we're very open and upfront. If you're not even in the United States, we have an international permit. We can take soil from outside of the U.S.
Fantastic.
And we can ship most of the we can ship Fortify out of the United States, but the other products we can't.
Okay, good to know.
Because of the content.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. All good.
But if you're in the U.S., all of our products are available.
And let me just say that we ship soil samples all the time out to Logan Labs just to get our basic inputs dialed in. Shipping soil samples in the mail, it's cheap, it's quick, it's easy.
It's easy.
Don't think that that's a barrier to getting some great biological testing done here at Earthfort.
Yeah.
Shipping soil samples is not a big deal. It's real easy.
Bag and
you're
good.
Sounds great. So once again, Matt, I just want to thank you for your time today. Thanks for all of your information, all your knowledge, and we'll definitely look forward to doing this again.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Take care.